Okay, let's go ahead and make this recording happen. Thank you for those of you who are on here live. That's always fun. You'll get to ask your questions at the end of this tonight. I just want to remind everybody, I like to do this at the beginning of every class here, the 8 ways that I help people grow food, whether you're a small gardener or whether you have thousands of acres. The principles of growing food are the same. There's just different methods we use, whether it's a small piece of land or a big giant piece of land. So I have my YouTube channel. I have my free Zoom meeting every Thursday night. That's what this is right now. And I have a Patreon library, which is pretty great. It has over 505 posts as of December 15th. And I've had quite a few more come out since then. So those who are on Patreon, that you have access to my whole library of how to grow food. Most of that focuses on growing food in a greenhouse. And then I've got my 17-week farmer training class, and that is a school that I started to get more farmers because we have food shortages, because we have farmer shortages. I'm also a soil laboratory, and I'm available for consulting if you want to start a farm. And I've got my boot camp. We have a boot camp in a couple of weeks towards the end of January. So that is coming up. So that is the 19th, 20th, and 21st. And we still have room for a couple of people. If you want to come to boot camp, that'll be a 3-day class here on the farm here in my greenhouse. You can come into the greenhouse and we're going to get dirty. We're going to grow food. It'll be hands-on. And we have classroom time where you'll be looking at slides and I'll show you all the magic of soil health. So I recommend that class to people who are serious about growing food. And we've been working on my book, getting it done. So I do have some congestion tonight. So if I start coughing, you're just going to have to forgive that. And then when I get over my coughing fit, we will continue on. So last week, we started talking about how to grow food from just converting a piece of land that's not really productive, say a pasture, or even just a piece of desert or whatever, just a random piece of land. How do you convert that into a food production system that will grow a lot of food? So today we are continuing that discussion. So this is part 2. If you want to see last week's, it's on my YouTube channel. So let's just jump. Excuse me, we're jumping right in where we left off last week. So last week we went over this list that's on the right side of the screen. This 1 through 10 that are numbered. And we simply identified, and I just very briefly talked about what these were. We didn't really go into them in depth at all, and it took us almost an hour just to explain what they are. And so tonight we're going to move on and talk about the second half of that, of converting a piece of new land into food production. So we need to start small. So if you look over here, I have this 1 through 5. We're going to go through these 1 through 5s. And then over here, we focus on a vegetable context. But there are other contexts. There could be a grain growing context. There could be a livestock context. And if you have questions about those, certainly ask them. It's just that mostly what I focus on is vegetables, but I can certainly help people with other agricultural food production as well. So I have pictures, so we're just going to keep going here. And here I am with a very small garden behind me. And you want to start your garden out small and manageable. A lot of people get excited about gardening and they make their garden too big. It's too hard to take care of. It's not a part of their culture. And things just get out of hand. There's too many weeds. They can't keep up with the watering. There's a lot of things that can happen that will slow people down. And you need to know your context. Context is super important. If you're an orchard person, you will do the soil soil health principles the same as if you are a vegetable person. If you're a grain person, it's still the same. If you're raising livestock, it's still the same. So the principles are all the same, but the tools you're going to use are going to be very different. So the only thing that really changes are the tools. It's not how you build soil. Building soil is the very same. If you're raising little dogs, like in this picture, then your context is going to be different. But it's interesting, and the reason I make this point is a lot of times people have their context messed up and they wonder why they fail, because they don't have the right, they just don't understand what they're doing. Okay, so in a vegetable context, the best way to start is you put cardboard on the ground to kill out the perennial weeds. And it is that simple. And we in boot camp during the summertime, we do this out on the lawn, just in the yard, to show people that you don't have to go to all the work of plowing it up and tilling it up. You don't need to do all that. It's unnecessary work. Just put down the cardboard. With a grain context, you're going to want to roll it down with a roller crimper. Now look at this tractor closely. You can see that that implement is mounted on the front of the tractor. And the reason we do that is it saves fuel and it saves time and labor expenses. Labor used to be the #1 cost in agriculture. Nowadays is switched, and fertilizer and fuel are more than labor now. So we have to cut those costs. So for a grain context, this is our weed management. This is our fertilizer. This is helping us to keep the moisture in the ground. So the roller crimper is a revolutionary tool for a grain context. And you could even do the same thing in a vegetable context. You just need, it just depends what you're growing. People growing pumpkins, they totally would do a huge field like that. Okay, once you get your cardboard down, cover it with 12 inches of compost. Of course, this says detritus here. Detritus is it means compost. It means mulch. You could use wood chips. You could use potting soil, any dead plant material, old hay. If you are using old hay and it has weed seeds in it, that could be a real problem. But anyway, you put about 12 inches on here. And I'm going to go back to the previous slide. So remember so here we put down the compost, and there we are doing the detritus on top. But that grain context picture, that is the cardboard that's suppressing weed growth, and it's the detritus on top. And now you simply plant your seeds in it and they come up. And this works on millions of acres because there are millions of American acres that are being farmed this way, and it's working. Okay, so then you plant. Usually with a grain context and a tractor and a roller crimper, you're planting seeds. In the vegetable context, we usually like to use transplants for most things. And then we got to water it in. Once you get your transplants in there, water it really good. Now remember back to last week, you've got to fertilize for the first 1 to 5 years. If you don't fertilize your new soils, they're not going to grow anything because they're not functioning yet. But once we get that detritus on there and the living plants in there, those are the 2 food sources for the microbes that will automatically make your fertilizer for you. So fertilizing is not something you have to do forever. Okay, and then you add more detritus every year. So in a vegetable context, we're going to be putting on 1 to 3 inches a year. That just always goes on those vegetable plots. If it's a bigger field like the grain context, then you're just going to be rolling down a cover crop once a year. And then that's feeding the microbes. Okay, so that was that beginning part. And then we have the tests and the tools. And we can just we can go through these quickly, but look at these two lists. The tools, compost, fertilizer, observation, those are actual tools that you use to be able to create a functioning soil, and so that you don't have the big expense of fertilizer and of fuel and labor. We can cut those things way down so that we can be profitable on our farming operation. And that way our expenses are much lower than what we can sell our crop for. So let's see, let's move on here. The first one, the tool of compost. The main purpose of compost is not a detritus sphere, which I showed the compost on that cardboard a minute ago. Well, that is not the main purpose of compost. You can certainly use it for that. The main reason it is to make an inoculant. So there's a picture of one of my students last year that was here last summer. This is Jessica, and she is making a compost inoculant in that bucket. So we put some compost in the mesh bag that's on top of that bucket there, and then we're spraying through a very high volume, not necessarily high pressure, but high volume of water, and it knocks the microbes off of the particles, and the microbes end up in the solution. And then we put that on the ground. So we inoculate the ground with that, and that establishes the ground with the proper microbes that will do the mineralization that makes the fertilizer for the plants. And sometimes with one application, you can get enough microbes out there that you never have to fertilize again. Sometimes it takes 3 or 4 applications every year for 3 to 5 years, depending on your soil conditions. But there have been people report that with one application, it fixes it. Usually it's 5 or 6 applications, but sometimes those 5 or 6 applications can happen in 1 year. So in 1 year, you've weaned yourself off of fertilizer. And then tool of fertilizer. I've never used this brand of fertilizer. I just pulled this image off the internet. Just excuse me, just to show you what a fish hydrolysate would look like. But this is just you know, you can buy all kinds of fertilizers. Just whatever fertilizer you want to use is fine for the first little while, so that your plants grow really well while you're healing the soil, and then eventually you get weaned off of it. And then the tool of observation. You got to be looking every day, like 15 minutes a day keeps the bugs and weeds away. That used to be my motto for, you know, the last forever teaching gardening classes. I haven't said it the last couple of years, but I should. But it's fun because observation will tell you what's happening. We just have to be really mindful about the observation, so that we actually, where we're not worried about the past or the future, but we're just bringing in information today, what is actually happening in a garden. So that's my greenhouse, and those are crops this summer that we're growing out there. Actually, that was 2 summers ago. I can tell by where the tomatoes are. And then the tool of the camera. The camera is something you want to use over time. So you would take one picture of one place, like every year for 10 years, and then you have a decade of pictures showing you whether your land is improving or if it is getting worse. We really find this valuable outside on the big areas, on the thousands of acres of ranch land, because it's hard to remember exactly. If you just have a garden in your backyard, it's a little bit easier to see what's going on. But when we're dealing with thousands of acres of grasslands, the camera is a very wonderful tool to tell us whether we are improving and growing more forage, or if we are going backwards and turning into a desert and not growing as much food. And then landrace seed breeding. I didn't get a picture in here, but just, you know, this is the idea of growing your own species to adapt to your own your own climate. So by saving your own seed and replanting that every year, after a decade, those plants are they are adapted to your pest problems, so they don't have pest problems. They're adapted to your disease issues, so they don't have them. They're adapted to your soil types. They're adapted to your climatic conditions. They even will adapt to your personal habits as a farmer. People have been doing this for 10,000 years, or as long as agriculture has been around, except for the last 100 years when we buy all our seeds from somewhere else. So I think we need to get back to this. It would certainly save farmers a lot of money, and because they wouldn't have so many inputs on their land if they had the genetics that do the best on the land where they're growing. The soil compaction penetrometer, this is a great tool. You don't have to go out and buy one of these. I like it though. In the work I do like it. And you just poke it in the ground, and then you measure when it gets up to a certain PSI, it tells you if you hit hard pans. So there are places on the ranch where I am hitting 300 PSI hard pans at 1 inch deep. And that means that Purdue University says that no plant will grow its root through 300 pounds. Most plants won't go through 150 pounds hard pan. And then there's other places where this goes 30 inches in the ground and I don't hit a thing. It just plunges in like I'm putting it into butter. And that's what we want. We don't want hard pans. So it's an interesting tool. The fun thing is I'll take this into people's fields, and I've done this several times. We go into somebody's field and I start sticking this around, and we're hitting hard pans at 3 inches, 4 inches, 6 inches. And people are thinking, okay, well, so is this good or bad? And then I go over to the fence where it's never been plowed, or it's been 30 years since it's been plowed, and it sinks all the way in. They're all like, wait, why did it go in there? How come I'm taking good care of this field? The whole field has hard pans. Says, well, what are you doing? Do you ever till? Well, of course I till. Yeah, well, so does the state highway department when they're building a highway. They have gigantic tillers, and they will till the soil down 4 feet deep. And I need to get a picture of one of those machines. And because we know from building things, the best way to compact soil is to completely crush it, turn it to stone. It's kind of like making concrete. And so as we're tilling our own gardens, we're doing that same type of thing. We make these beautiful, great hard pans, which is not great and beautiful, but I'm being facetious. So the tool of planting, how do we plant in a no-till system? So of course, this is a vegetable context here. I've got the drill auger. I can drill a hole. And then you see those cardboard pots that I made. I just roll those around a soup can and put a rubber band on it. And then I pull it off the soup can, fill it with soil, and put seeds in it, or I can put baby transplants in there. And then those grow up, and then I drill a hole with the drill auger, and that entire cardboard pot goes into the hole. And then the cardboard has a really high ratio of fungal food compared to bacterial food. So that's a good thing to help feed the soil. So there's a lot of carbon in it compared to nitrogen. And so it's good for the soil. You want that cardboard in there. Don't take the cardboard off. That defeats the entire purpose. If you're going to take it off, just go buy some plastic pots. Okay, the tool in the middle, I don't even know what that's called. I bought it off Amazon. It was called a transplanter or something. It looked interesting, so I bought it, and it actually works really good. I like it, and I think it's stainless steel. It's pretty well built for what it is. And so you can stick that in the ground in the no-till systems, especially with the vegetables, because you have a foot or a good 4 to 6 inches at least of that detritosphere of your compost on there. So the top is soft. It's not like you can't plant in it. And so you can stick that in there, and we can drop transplants in there, or we can put seeds in. But actually the tool I use the most is the last one, that wooden handled thing. That used to be a shovel. I just cut the shovel head off and sharpened the stick, and that's what we call a dibber. And we just stick that in the ground, make a little hole, and then we pop the cells out of that 200 cell plug tray that wooden handled thing's sitting on. And then I just put the plants in, and then I water them really good, and that's it. So the transplanting is very, very simple. And I do transplant most of what I grow. But you can transplant a lot. I can transplant a 200 cell tray in about 15, 20 minutes. It's pretty quick. It's no big deal. And then there's the forms comparison chart. This is something that's in my book. As soon as my book is published and out, this is in there. It's probably 8 or 10 pages. But the idea, it's just kind of a flow chart. So I put the ecological processes, you can see them here in the different columns. In column B, C, D, and E, we've got water cycle, mineral cycle, energy flow, and ecological succession. So the whole idea of this chart is to ask questions. So in column A, if we scrolled down here, which we can't because this is just an image, but we would ask questions in here. So you can see here, what are the processes? So I simply, in this first line here, I just have a definition so we know what we're talking about. But then as we go down the chart, we would use this chart, and it becomes very effective tool because we can ask management questions. We can say, should I till the soil this year? And it would tell us, and then we could say, would it help the water cycle? Yes or no? Will it help the mineral cycle? Yes or no? And that's what we ask on any question we would write in column A. So we don't actually have to have the chart. What we need is a blank piece of paper and actually do the exercise. That's the key here. Because if we have a management decision, like should I inoculate with compost? Will that help the water cycle? Yes, it will, because the microbes are going to be growing in there, and they're going to create a porosphere where the water will go in. It will infiltrate better. So that's a yes. So we ask the same question about the mineral cycle. Will adding microbes with a compost extract help the mineral cycle? Well, yes, it will, because the microbes are the mineralizers. So by getting them in there, it's just like if we're going to be a cattle farmer and we have a 100-acre pasture, but there's no cows out there, we have to buy cows to put out there before we can raise beef. So in order to have the mineral cycle work, we have to get the microbes out there and get them inoculated. So the answer is yes, it helps the mineral cycle. So if we did that with energy flow, is it going to help us get more sunlight energy, more photosynthesis? Yes, it will, because they will make it more fertile, so more plants will grow. So we can harvest more sunlight. And then column A, what about ecological succession and the whole community dynamics of the whole ecosystem? Is it going to help if I get the microbes out there? Yes, because we're going to grow more plants. We're going to have more water infiltrating. It's going to help every other organism to grow and to thrive. And we're going to be having less weed pressures, because if we get the microbes doing what they do, and they'll stop stimulating the germination of weeds. Because we only find the germination of weeds where you have high, what is it, NO3 nitrate? I hope I'm saying that right, but not. Yeah, nitrate. That's the one that stimulates the weeds to grow, and you find that in bacterial dominant soils. So by getting our high amounts of the protozoa, beneficial nematodes, beneficial microarthropods, all those good guys in the soil, then we're going to be creating more ammonium, and so we have more of a balance of the NO3 and the NH4, which means ammonium and nitrate. When we have a balance of that, we don't sprout all those early succession noxious weeds. Anyway, I'm getting off on topics that wasn't even planning on talking about, but that's how you would use this chart tonight. So the next one is livestock. Don't you love that picture? Let's just look at that picture for a minute. So I think when we first look at this picture, we see these two sheep in the front. Look right between the two sheep in the very back. Look at how fat that big one is back there. It's pretty awesome. But how is livestock a tool? Livestock is a food growing tool when we incorporate livestock within our food growing systems. Their manure, their saliva, the pounding of their hooves, all have beneficial effects upon the soil. The urine from the animals, is almost a pure nitrogen source. There's other things in it, but it's very high in nitrogen. So when we use the livestock properly with proper management, moving them in and out of areas when we want them, and we have a strategic holistic plan of how we're managing the livestock as a tool, then it really enhances everything else we're doing. There's a lot of research done on the compost, different types of compost. And the researchers are finding that with the very best compost in the world, they still can't beat the inoculation that happens on the land. They can't beat the livestock people. If people have livestock, don't worry about going all the work of compost. But you have to manage the livestock, and they've got to be managed properly to have it be an effective tool. And this is something that's often left out of gardening systems. We don't even think of it, but we need to be, because it will grow us better food if we do incorporate the livestock. And you don't have to have funny looking sheep. You could use cattle. There's a lot of animals you can use. If you're really after the most amount of microbes, go for cattle, because the rumen in the cattle produces more microbes than any other animal. And one more note on cattle and livestock is the cattle are one cow will produce a lot more, I guess fertility is the right way to say it, because it's the entire process, but they produce enough fertility to fertilize twice as much as what they eat. Let me put that in a math formula for you. If a cow eats 1 acre of pasture, she will create enough fertility for 2 acres of pasture. And no other animal can do that. So cattle are vital to keeping the Earth's ecosystems healthy. And there's a lot of anti-cattle people right now, and that's too bad, because they simply don't understand the facts. So there we are with those, and let's just run through these tests. So those were the tools. Now there are some tests we can do, and we want to do all of these tests when we first start our garden, and then we test every year, and then after 5 or 6 years we start seeing if we are getting better, if we're growing more food, or if our land is degrading and we're growing less food. So the water infiltration test, this is an easy one. You put your ring in the ground about 3 inches down, you pound it in, you put 1 inch of water in there, and you time it with a timer to see how long it takes to infiltrate. And you write that down. And then you come back next year and see if you have improved infiltration or if it has got worse. So it doesn't tell you a lot the first time you do it, because it's really a comparison. Now, if it takes 15 minutes for that 1 inch of water to infiltrate, then you know that you have very bad infiltration, and you better get some microbes out there, and you better get microbe food out there, because you don't have any porosphere for where the water needs to go. So the bricks test, that's a fun one. These are like $25, $30. You can buy them on Amazon. It's called a refractometer. I should have written that on the slide, but it's not there. So again, it's a refractometer. And when you look through this, you can tell how much sugar is in the plant. So I'm going to get my cursor here. So right here on this side, there's that little plexiglass plate. You open that up. It hinges right there where my cursor is. It hinges right there. So this opens up. You put a drop of plant juice on there. So you would get the leaf of a plant, smash it with vice grips, and a drop of the plant juice would go on there. And then you close this down so that it spreads out. And then you look through it, and there's a graduated scale in there from like 1 to like 15 or 20 or something. And the higher the number, the better. But you can find a chart on the internet that will tell you like what crops should be. Because like lettuce, if you had like 9 or 10 on lettuce, that's really high. But for something like alfalfa, that would be low. You want to get 18, 19, close to 20, at least in your double digits for all of your forages that animals would eat. But when it comes to vegetables, a lot of times they're below 10. So in some presentations, you'll see people say they have to be in double digits. Well, they're coming from a context of agronomy where they're dealing with forages for livestock. Because in the vegetable world, a lot of species don't get that high. Things like kale, excuse me, things like kale, cabbage, collards, spinach, those are lower. Those would be more single digit type things. And I don't even have that memorized, but I'm just giving you the general information here. And then there's the slake test. Anybody can do this. You just get a quart jar, make a little place with the wire for a clod of dirt to set. And so you would go out to your garden, you would dig up some clods of dirt, and you would dry those out completely. They need to be completely dry. So meaning you would set them on if you're in a dry climate like in the Western United States, you would just set them on the counter for a week or whatever in the house, and they will be sufficiently dry. If you're in a very humid climate like the South, you may need to put these in a room with a dehumidifier. But they need to be dry, and then you just set them in there, and the water level is up here. It may be hard to see on the picture, but I'm pointing at it right now with my cursor. But the water level is right there, right here. So the water level is above where the clod will go. So you put the clod in there, and what this is telling you is if the clod stays intact, like in 20 minutes, if you still have a clod there, then the biotic glues that the bacteria are making are holding that soil together. So they're holding the soil together, which is what you want. What this means is it's telling you whether this will fall apart, whether it will erode in a rainstorm. So if you have this picture is 24 hours old, and I was impressed by it. So these were 3 different places in my gardens. One of them is from the pasture, 2 of them are from gardens. One's from a potato field, and the other one's from just another garden where I have random stuff. But I have very little silt on the bottom. Down here on the bottom, very little, and the clods up here are basically the same size. If you have a soil where the microbes are not holding the aggregates together, it will completely dissolve and it will all fall through to the bottom. In 24 hours, there would be maybe nothing up here, maybe 1 or 2 little pebbles that wouldn't fit through. So this is a test you can do. You can do this any time of year. You just need the soil to be dry. And this will tell you if you have good microbial structure to your soil. All right. And then there's the shovel test. So just take your shovel out, plunge it in, dig up a big giant clump with your shovel. And this one is sitting sideways. So between my fingers, you're seeing the top, the A horizon of the soil there. And then right below it, you can see that white part. So that's about 3 inches down. And with my penetrometer that I stuck in the ground, I was hitting a hard pan, and it was 150 pounds at 3 inches down. So when I dug it with the soil or with the shovel, now you can actually see. And so there's this white strip right here. And that was a hard pan. So above it, you can see how it's a different color. It's chocolatey, beautiful brown color. And then below it, the colors start to change. Down here, the soil is almost black. And black is not always a good thing. Black often means anaerobic, not enough oxygen in the soil. And this was almost like peat moss. It had so many roots in it. And so this had so many roots, it was almost unhealthy. And down here, it didn't have quite enough roots. So you can learn a lot from digging in the ground. So the shovel test is good. I also like to look for aggregates and the porosphere to see how many pores are in the soil, how many aggregates are holding together. This deep part down here was actually really, it was aggregated very well. But it was also falling apart because it didn't have enough roots. So this hard pan is stopping a lot of the root growth. And I think what's happening is I'm building soil upward into the sky. So the ground is getting taller. And that's not really what we want to do. What we want to do is to grow these roots down in the ground. This is probably 12 inches from here to here. probably got about 8 inches out of the ground there, but we want to go like 10 feet in the ground, 20 feet in the ground with perennial grasses to get the carbon from the air way down in the ground, because carbon is free fertilizer. Okay, so there's another test you can do, and this is a species count and an identification test. This one's going to take a notebook. So in one area, excuse me, in one area of the pasture, and this is a vegetable plot. It looks like a lawn, but it's not. This is early in the spring, and that is cereal rye and hairy vetch in here that I rolled down, and then we grew vegetables on it. So what you do is you come in here, and every 2 inches or every 3 inches or every 6 inches, you can figure out how to do the test. You just need to do it the same every year. So what I do is every 3 inches, I look straight down. So right here at the end of the tape measure, I count how many species are there. So in this picture here, I probably had 2 species, but I was hitting grass on every 3 inches. So here there was grass, here there was grass, here. So every 3 inches I'm hitting grass, but maybe every 2 feet I would hit something else. There would be a broadleaf in there or a legume. And then when you look over here, you can see that as I'm coming across every 3 inches, I'm hitting mostly dirt. So this part was getting a lot lower score than this part. And then I add up everything that I count. So if I hit a living plant, that's 1. But if I hit 2 different species on each place, like the 1 and the 3, then that would count as 2. And if I hit bare dirt, it's a 0. And so this gives you like a base to work from, so that over time, in 10 years, you will know if you are growing more plants or less plants. And then there's the plot planting test. You can use this to do a lot of things, but this is my it's one of my gardens with the cereal rye and the daikon radishes and hairy vetch. And then I roll that down at the end of the year. But the daikon radish is winter kill, so they're not there right now because this is the springtime and it's starting to grow. You know what? I think it's the fall because those trees are yellow. So I guess I'm wrong. I should look at my picture. But the plot planting test, it tests your soils. So if you planted the same thing over an entire area, and then you would go out and look at your land, and if you, let's just pretend you have 1,000 acres, well, you may have 300 acres in one part of it where that plant didn't grow as good, and that would tell you that the soil is different in that area. And then the side-by-side comparison test, that tests the different plants. And that's exactly what I was doing here. I was testing the different varieties of lettuce. So this was in the summertime. And this one, you can see it's little, the leaves are small, but it's already starting to go to seed. Just the way that it's shaped there, you can see it's bolting up. So this was one that I wrote down, and I won't grow that one in the summer. It doesn't like the heat, but it grew very well in the winter time. But this, excuse me, this red romaine here, it grew really good in the summer. And so now I know which ones to grow in the summer and which ones to grow in the winter. So that's a simple test you can do for all your different types of plants. And then we move on to tests that are appropriate for professionals, and there's 2 of those. One is soil tests. So that's me with my crazy Einstein scientist hair. My wife took that picture and I said, we can't show that to the public. She said she likes her mad scientist, so we kept the picture. But anyway, so there's my microscope. I've got my soil sample on the slide, and I am counting for beneficial nematodes and for bad nematodes, and I am counting for bacteria, whether we have anaerobic or aerobic bacteria, and then we will do a count for the aerobic and anaerobic protozoa, and we will also be looking for microarthropods. And then not really most importantly, but usually it's most important is the fungus count. We want to be looking for the beneficial fungi. And the beneficial fungi are the things we see the least of in soils. So, but anyway, that's me in my lab doing my thing. And then the other test that I really like is the sap analysis test. And that's something that is probably out of the scope for home gardeners. But if you're a farmer growing a lot of land, like thousands of acres or whatever, if you're a big farmer, you would probably find the sap analysis test to be really good. So you would take leaf tissue once a week and you would overnight it to a lab. And then the lab would run the test for you to show you what your exact measurements of nutrients are in the plant. And this is a lot more effective than soil tests. I mean, since the 1940s, we've been doing soil tests to see what available nutrients are in the soil so that your plants will grow. But this is a lot better way to do it. I like the sap analysis because just because something's available in the soil doesn't mean your plant's going to take it up. There's a lot of stuff happening in the soil, and your plants don't always take it up just because it's there. That's part of the problem with buying expensive fertilizer. You buy it and you put it out there. There's no guarantee the plants are going to take it up. But with a sap analysis test, you can learn exactly what your plants are taking up. But this, this is pretty technical stuff and it's kind of expensive. But if you're a vegetable farmer with 1,000 acres, you will certainly be making enough money to pay for this. It will pay for itself the first year you do it for sure. And of course, what do you do with the results of the test? You would adjust your management so that your plants could be taking up the minerals that they need. You would inoculate with more microbes and that type of thing. Okay, I'm going to turn this over to questions now. Let me look at the clock and see what time it is. 7:43. Once again, it went a little longer than I thought we were going to with that portion, but usually like 15-20 minutes. But this was long tonight. And it was supposed to be on purpose. But I want to remind you, winter boot camp is coming up. January 19, 2021. Sign up, come to that class. And then the 17-week course, it is both online and on site, meaning you can choose whether you come here or if you want to do the online version. And we will just hook you into a Zoom call during our classes every day. And then the hands-on portion, you will just be doing at home in your own garden. Go ahead and type in the chat, or you can unmute yourself if you'd like to and ask your questions.
William, Melanie here. I've been thinking, on our slope where we're going to plant all this food, 65 by 35, not a great big garden, but it is for us. Before they laid the topsoil, they supposedly put down good dirt. I am concerned about the weeds that are going to come up through that. And now we have this screened topsoil on the top of it. And I thought, we never should have done the topsoil until the spring, especially because we weren't able to they didn't get it in time. We weren't able to do the cover crop and then just let it die. So what should we do?
Okay, so if you're dealing with weeds, the best thing you can do is mow them down. Weeds are your friends. Let me say it 3 more times. Weeds are your friends. Weeds are your friends. Weeds are your friends. I say that and I'm silly about it because people don't believe it. But weeds are your friends. You want to let them get about 1 foot high and then mow them down. Mow them down. Get all that, the leaf and the stems mulched up back on top of your ground. So if you have a weed problem, that's a good problem. Get them mowed down and get a whole bunch of wood chips out there on top so that your fungus starts growing and you start creating some ammonium in the soil, and then you won't have as many weed seeds germinating. Weed seeds only germinate on like in real mass, like really bad, when you have disturbed soil. Go into a forest where there's no disturbance and you hardly ever see weeds. But if you take a rototiller into the same forest and till it up, you come back 6 months later and it's 6 feet high with weeds. So the weed seeds are usually there. They're just waiting for a disturbance to germinate.
What if they're coming up between your plants?
Then plant your plants far enough apart that you can get your lawnmower in between.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, that's exactly the thing to do. Okay, do we have another question? You can type it in, you can unmute and ask a question.
So I don't remember if I heard you say it, or I know I've heard it before. Different types of manure you have to let set, and others you can use right away. And so my cousin was telling me rabbits are great because you can use it right away. But what about chickens? Can you use chicken manure right away, or do you have to let it set?
Yeah, so chicken manure is it's pretty hot. You need to let it sit. In fact, rabbits are that way too. I know people say you can use it right away, but if you use too much, you can still burn plants. So the reason you use manure would be for a plant nutrient, for a fertilizer. So you always want to be very careful with any type of fertilizer, just because you don't know what it's doing. I mean, if it comes in a bag and it has instructions, that's pretty easy to know what you're doing. But when it's your own fertilizer, like you're rounding up manure or whatever, you need to take a couple of, tablespoons or whatever, mix it in some water, water it to your plants. If your plant dies and the leaves are burning up, it had too much nitrogen in it. So I always tell people, never water all your plants when you're trying to figure that out. Water one plant and see how it responds before you water them all, because sad stories of a lot of people killing their whole garden because they didn't do a test first.
Okay. So we did look around on Craigslist for old manure piles, and there was somebody that said they had a pile of horse manure that was over a year old, and they would help you load it into anything you brought to them to take it away. So is horse manure something that you'd be interested in if it was sitting there for more than a year?
Okay, yeah, the answer is yes, but you've got to remember there's two things you're doing with this. One reason you're gathering this stuff up is to make compost. The other reason is if you were trying to find manure for a plant nutrient, for a fertilizer.
Okay.
I don't ever really recommend people try to find all that stuff for fertilizer because it's too tricky to figure it out. So just go buy a gallon of fish emulsion, use that as your fertilizer for a couple of years, but then collect all the old manure piles you can and make good compost out of them. And then you can use all of that detritus to build your soil, to get all the microbes going.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, there is one more thing about that. If you don't want to go to the work to make a really high quality compost, because it can take 3 or 4 times of failing before you figure it out, because it's not easy to learn how to do it. It takes a lot of trial and error. So what you could do with all that detritus is you just spread it out thinly on top of your garden, like 2-3 inches thick, and then just let the worms do do it for you. But here's the thing, if you make a really good compost, then you can inoculate your garden with the compost extract. That means you get all of the beneficial bacteria, fungus, protozoa, nematodes, microarthropods. You get them all in there right now and you're off and running. If you just take those piles of compost and you're putting out like 2 or 3 inches a year. I said compost, but just old manure stuff, old detritus. If you're spreading it out, it can slow you down 3 or 4 years because it can take a long time for those the beneficials to get established in there. So it's much faster to do it with the compost.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, any more questions?
I think we're good. We really appreciate it.
Okay, good. Vernie, Helena,
Hello.
any more questions from anybody?
I guess I have a question about manure and your worm bin. How long does your manure have to sit before you add it to a worm bin?
Okay, yeah, good question. You don't have to let it sit at all. The key with a worm bin is they need lots of oxygen, and oxygen will penetrate any kind of a manure pile like 1 foot. So if your worms are only, like what they're living in, the manure is about 1 foot thick, then you can just pile it on there. You could go clean out a barnyard, and you could just pile it up in there, and you're going to want to keep it around 70% moisture. So you don't want it dripping wet, but you don't want it dry either. It needs to be around that 70% range. And then the worms will just come up in there and they'll eat it and they'll devour it. And it's great. There's not really any diseases that live in manure. So even if you stuck a front end loader in a big manure pile and you pull it up, and it's really stinky and black and nasty, if you put that on your worm bin, your worms are just going to eat all of those anaerobic bacteria. The worms will clean them up. So that's pretty awesome. You're not going to kill the worms. The thing that kills worms is too much moisture. They can drown. So if you had a pile of manure that was 10 feet high, the worms they're just going to stay on the outside where they can get oxygen. So the key to having worms decompose and turn compost out of whatever you give them is it needs to be shallow. So my worm bin is 2 feet thick, but the bottom doesn't have a bottom. The compost sits on pipes, and the pipes are 4 inches apart. And so the air can get in from the bottom and from the top. So the worm bin is suspended 2 feet off the ground, and then it's 2 feet high. And so it gets air penetration from the bottom and the top. So it works good. But yeah, you can put finished compost on there, or you can just put fresh manure. But here's the one warning you need to know. If you just put raw manure on a worm bin, it will not kill the weed seeds. So once it's composted and you're using that compost, that finished vermicompost or worm castings, it will still have viable seeds in it. So if you're using old hay that had a bunch of weeds in it, those will still be there. So if you want to kill the weed seeds, you got 2 theories, or I mean methods, not really theories. The first method is you do a thermophilic compost where you heat it up, and then once the heating process is over, that takes like 6 weeks or less. And then you put it on the worms. The other way to kill the weed seeds is you spread all that out, all that, whatever it is, your material that's full of weed seeds, you spread it out about 2 inches thick, and you water it, but it has to be warm weather. And then it will, most of the weed seeds will germinate. And once they germinate, then you can put it in the worm bin, and most of the weeds will die at that point because you've already germinated them.
Okay, that's good to know. That's kind of what I was wondering.
All right, perfect. Okay, we will be back here next week. Same time, same place. Same link. I do put the link on Facebook every week so people can get on. And this is recorded and it'll be on YouTube as soon as it uploads, which is usually a day. And yeah, bring your questions, bring your friends. And I like doing this. I like helping people. So if you want to sign up for one of my classes, go to my website at www.georgiarevolution.com. And you are welcome. Helena says, thanks, William, in the chat. So you are welcome. Everybody's welcome.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Happy New Year.
Thank you so much. Same to you.
All right.
I'm going to close this down. See you next week.